The wind howled through the jagged rocks like a wounded animal. Sharp dust flew in the air, cutting across the skin like tiny blades. On the cold, broken ground, she sat alone, shaking and afraid. The alien woman had nowhere to go. Her clothes were torn, made of rough cloth barely holding together. Her purple skin was bruised and dirty. Her eyes, once full of life, were now empty. She had not eaten in days. Her body was thin, weak, and tired. She looked like she had already died. Only her chest still rose and fell. She had been thrown out. By her own kind. Why? Because she was seen as weak, useless, a burden. Her family had turned away. Her tribe had left her behind on purpose. If you slow us down, you die, they had said. And so they walked on, leaving her in the rocky wasteland. To face the cold night alone, she didn't cry. There were no tears left, just silence, just pain. But then she heard footsteps. Her heart jumped. Her first thought was fear. Maybe a beast. Maybe one of her people coming back to finish the job. She forced her weak body to turn and look. But what she saw was strange. It was a man, a human. He was tall and strong, wearing simple clothing. His hands were large, rough with hard work. His face was serious, eyes calm. And in those hands he held stones. Big stones. The alien woman didn't speak. She just stared. Why was a human here? This place was far from any city. It was wild and dangerous. The man didn't look at her for long. He simply walked past her, placed the stones nearby, and walked away again. She blinked. Was it real? She imagined him. The next day, he came back. This time, he brought even more stones. Big, flat ones. He arranged them in a circle not far from her. Again, he said nothing. Again, he left. Days passed. Every morning, he returned. Every time, he brought more stones. He stacked them carefully, like he was building something. A wall. A structure she didn't understand. Why? Why would a human do this? He brought food one day, half a loaf of bread and a bottle of clean water. He placed them near her feet and stepped back. The alien woman stared at the food. Her stomach growled. Her pride told her to refuse. But her hunger was too strong. She took it. She ate slowly, watching him with wide, unsure eyes. He smiled, just a small smile. Kind, soft. Her hands trembled. No one had smiled at her like that in a long time. Still, she didn't speak. She didn't know his language. And he didn't seem to know hers. But they understood something deeper — survival. One night, the wind became cruel, cold and sharp. She curled beside a rock, trying to sleep. But her thin cloth was no match for the storm. Suddenly, she felt warmth. She opened her eyes to see fire. The human had made a fire near her. Not too close, but close enough to warm her frozen fingers. He was already walking away into the night. She stared into the flames. Why was he doing this? What did he want? Nothing made sense. The next morning, she stood. Just for a moment. Her legs were weak, but she took a few steps toward the small stone structure he was building. She touched one of the walls. Rough but strong. Real. The human was there, carrying more stones. When he saw her standing, he stopped. For a long moment, they looked at each other. She didn't speak. He didn't speak. Then slowly, she bent down, picked up a stone, and placed it beside the others. The human looked at her. His lips moved into a bigger smile. He nodded once. That small nod was more than just approval. It was respect, and for the first time, the alien woman didn't feel like a burden. She didn't feel worthless. For the first time in days. She felt seen. She looked at the stones again. The human wasn't building for himself. He was building a home. For her, the morning sky was still gray when she woke up. The fire had died sometime during the night, but its ashes were still warm. She held her hands close, stealing the last bits of heat. Her body ached, but her heart beat with a strange new rhythm, a little faster than usual, because he would come again today. The human, she didn't know his name. She didn't know where he lived or why he was here. But every day, he returned. And every time, he brought more stones. She watched him from the same spot, quiet, confused, and a little curious. He never asked her anything, never shouted, never showed fear or disgust. He just worked. He would come with arms full of rocks, some smooth, some flat, some heavy. He would place them with care. Every stone had a purpose. Every movement was slow but strong. His hands were covered in tiny cuts, and sometimes his shirt stuck to his skin with sweat. But still, he built. She had seen builders before. Back in her colony, before they threw her out, she had watched the stoneworkers raise walls. They had tools, machines, helpers. But this human, he had nothing. Just 2 hands, and an unshakable will. She wanted to speak to him. She wanted to ask him why. But her mouth was dry. And even if she could speak, she didn't know what language he used. So instead, she watched. One day, while he was stacking the walls, she noticed something new. He wasn't just building 4 walls now, he was shaping a roof. He brought long sticks, thick branches from the nearby drywood trees. He laid them across the top, tying them with twisted vines. She had thought it was just a shelter, but now it was slowly becoming a home, and still. He said nothing. That night, the wind was gentler. The stars came out. She lay on the ground, beside the fire he had left, and for the first time in many nights, she didn't feel fear. She felt safe. The next morning, something happened that surprised her. When the human arrived, he wasn't carrying stones. He was holding a small clay pot. He placed it gently beside her and stepped away. Curious, she lifted the lid. It was soup, warm, thick, and filled with root vegetables and soft grains. It smelled strange, but good. She looked up at him, unsure. He gave her a slow nod. She sipped. It was delicious. The warmth spread through her chest, waking her insides. Her hands shook as she held the bowl. Not from weakness this time, but from emotion. No one had cooked for her since her mother died. She looked up again. The human had already gone back to building. She watched him work as she finished the soup. The sun rose behind him, casting a golden light over his back. His muscles moved like ropes under his skin. His eyes stayed focused on the wall. He didn't glance at her. He didn't wait for thanks. He wasn't helping her for reward. He just wanted her to live. Later that day, she did something she had not done in weeks. She stood again, slowly. Her legs were sore, but they didn't collapse. Step by shaky step, she walked toward the shelter. She didn't stop at the edge. She walked right up beside the human. He paused and looked at her. She bent down and picked up a flat stone. Without a word, she handed it to him. The moment was quiet but powerful. His eyes met hers. He nodded again. Then, with a small grin, he took the stone and placed it gently where it belonged. For the next hour, they worked together. She could not lift heavy rocks up. She could carry small ones. She could place them in piles. She could collect vines. And every time she helped, he gave her that same look, calm, proud, and kind. She had never felt this way before. Not even with her own people. Not even with family. She felt seen, useful, alive when the sun began to fall. The man stood and stretched. She expected him to leave like always. But this time, he did something new. He picked up a long, flat stone. He walked to a small spot near the corner of the shelter and began to carve. Using a piece of sharp metal, he scratched symbols into the stone. She stepped closer. She couldn't read his language, but she understood. He was giving the house a name. He was giving her a name. He placed the stone near the front of the shelter, facing outward. Then he turned to her, gave one last respectful nod, and walked away into the fading light. She stood there, staring at the nameplate, her heart thudding in her chest. This wasn't just shelter anymore. It was hers. And she wasn't just surviving now. She was beginning to live. The night came fast. Dark clouds covered the stars, and the wind returned with a sharp bite. The alien woman sat beside the small stone shelter, arms wrapped tightly around herself. The warmth of the human soup still lingered inside her, but it was fading fast. The human had not returned after placing the name stone. She didn't expect him to. He had already done too much, more than anyone in her life had ever done. Why would he return again? She didn't deserve it. She leaned her head back against the cold wall, listening to the wind howl across the rocks. The shelter wasn't finished. Yet, the roof was only half covered. Gaps still let the wind in, and the walls weren't sealed. Still, it was better than sleeping on open ground. Her fingers trembled. Her body shivered. She remembered the time when she was warm, truly warm in her old village. Back when her mother wrapped her in thick blankets made of woven leaves and soft fur. That life was gone now. Her own people had turned their backs on her suddenly. A soft glow flickered against the stone. She opened her eyes slowly. There it was again. Fire. She turned her head. The human had returned. He didn't say anything. He didn't look for thanks. He simply placed dry wood in a circle of stones and lit a flame. The fire grew quickly, casting warm orange light across the rocky shelter. He placed a thicker log beside it and stood back. The alien woman stared at the fire, then at him. Her lips parted slightly. She wanted to say something, but no words came. He just nodded, as he always did, and stepped into the shadows. But this time, he didn't leave. He didn't walk back into the hills. Instead, he sat down near the edge of the light, resting his back against a stone. The alien woman watched him carefully. His eyes were closed. His body was still. He looked tired, very tired. His hands were bandaged now. Scrapes and bruises covered his fingers. He had been working harder than she realized, and yet he had returned to build, to warm her, to stay close. She turned her body slowly, inching closer to the fire. The heat soaked into her skin. Her toes uncurled, her shoulders relaxed. She didn't know how long they sat like that, human and alien, silent under the night sky. Two strangers from different worlds sharing one small flame. She looked at him again. Why did he care? She wasn't from his species. She wasn't strong or useful or pretty. She was broken. Her own kind had called her a mouth with no hands. Weak, pathetic, worthless. But this man, he never looked at her with pity. He looked at her like she was still someone. Morning came with soft light and calm air. The human was gone when she opened her eyes. But beside her was a fresh piece of bread, still warm. And beside it a folded cloth, a blanket, made of woven plant fibers and animal skin. She ran her hand across the surface. It wasn't perfect, but it was soft, and it smelled like earth and sun. She pressed it close to her chest. No one had ever made something just for her before. Later that day, she explored the shelter. The walls were stronger now, tighter. The gaps were smaller. A few cracks still let air through, but it was clear this was being made to last. Not just a place to hide, but a place to live. At one corner, she noticed a flat surface or raised platform of stone. It looked like a bed, or something close to it. She sat on it carefully. It held her weight. She smiled. It was a small smile, but real. That evening, she waited. She knew he would come, and he did, carrying more stones, branches, and a strange bottle filled with dark liquid. He set to work immediately, reinforcing the roof, placing a stone slab in the middle of the floor. Then he built a new fire, using the dark liquid to help it catch quickly. Then he sat again, same spot, same posture. This time she didn't stay far. She picked up a small branch, broke it into two, and placed the pieces into the fire beside his. He looked at her. Their eyes met in the FIRELIGHT, and in that quiet, something passed between them. Not words, trust, real. Solid trust. That night, she slept on the stone bed with the soft blanket around her. The fire crackled gently near the door. And for the first time since being cast out, she dreamed, not of pain, not of hunger. She dreamed of a house with a roof, of walls that did not shake in the wind, of a man who came each day with bare hands, building something greater than stone. He was building hope, and that hope now lived inside her chest. The wind howled again that morning, but the sound no longer scared her. The alien woman opened her eyes and stretched slowly on the stone bed. Her new blanket, though rough, had kept her warm. The small fire near the doorway had died down, but enough embers glowed to make her feel safe. She sat up and looked around the tiny space for walls, a roof, a stone bed, a fire circle. This was not just a shelter now. It felt like a home, her home. She ran her hand along the nearest wall. The stones were rough but strong. They didn't fall apart in the wind. They didn't shake. The human had placed each one with care. Every line, every gap, every crack had been shaped by his own two hands. She stepped outside. The cold air brushed her face, but her body didn't tremble like before. She had eaten. She had rested. And now she was no longer afraid. Then she saw him just as she expected. The human was already working. His back was to her, muscles tight as he lifted another heavy rock. He placed it near the outer edge of the shelter and began building a second wall, this one wider, curved like a half circle. She tilted her head in confusion. Was he building a second house? She moved closer. Quietly. The wall wasn't part of the shelter. It wasn't a room. It was a barrier, a shield, a wall around the home, not to trap her inside, but to protect her from what was outside. She stared in silence. In her world, walls had always meant cages. The last time she had seen walls rise around her, it was when her own people had locked her away, thinking she was too weak to be useful. She had cried and begged, but they left her there, hungry and alone. But this wall felt different. This wall had no roof, no gate. It curved only halfway, like open arms. It was low enough for her to climb if she ever wanted, but it was strong enough to block wind, sand, or wild animals. This wasn't a cage. It was safety. And once again, he had done it all without speaking. She stepped toward him, her bare feet brushing the dust. He didn't notice her until she lifted a small stone and placed it beside the one he was working on. He turned, surprised. She didn't look at him. She simply knelt down and began arranging the stone carefully, matching what she had seen him do. For a long second, the human didn't move. Then, slowly, he smiled and returned to work. Side by side, they worked through the morning. She handed him smaller stones. He lifted the heavy ones. He showed her how to stack them, so they wouldn't fall. There was no need for language. Their hands did all the speaking. Later, while he rested under a tree, she looked at the house from a distance. It stood in the middle of the rocky land, like a quiet promise. It wasn't beautiful, It wasn't large, but it was real. And it belonged to her. She remembered the name stone he had carved. She still couldn't read the letters, but she had memorized the shape of them. She traced them with her fingers every night before sleeping. It felt like her soul had been given a name. In her culture, names were only given to those who mattered. Maybe, just maybe. She mattered now. That evening, she made a decision. She waited until he left, like always, and then she gathered sticks. Not many, just enough. She had watched him build fires enough times to understand. With trembling hands, she made a small fire near the shelter. It took time, 3 tries, but finally, it caught. She stared at the flame and smiled. The next morning, when the human returned, the fire was still burning, and she was already up, sweeping dust from the stone bed using a bunch of dry leaves tied with string. The man stopped. He looked around. The place looked different, more alive, more like a home. He gave her a slow nod, one that lasted longer than usual. Then he placed something near her feet, a folded cloth bag. She opened it carefully. Inside were more supplies: dried fruit, a bone needle, some twine, and a small wooden carving of a bird. A gift, a simple one, but something personal. He had carved it for her. Her fingers curled tightly around the bird. She didn't speak. Her eyes stung with tears she didn't expect. He turned to leave as always, but just before disappearing into the hills. He looked back, and this time she nodded first. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The sun had risen higher in the sky. The stone walls no longer cast long shadows. They stood proud and firm. Warmed by sunlight and time, the alien woman stepped out of her small home, the wooden bird still resting on the window edge like a silent guardian. Her fingers brushed its smooth surface before she turned toward the sound she now waited for each morning. And there he was, the human. He was already working again. He had found another large stone, not like the others. This one was heavier, darker, shaped almost like a table. He was trying to lift it with both arms, his legs bent. His breath loud in the morning air. She watched from a distance. He strained but couldn't move it far. His foot slipped slightly, and the stone dropped with a dull thud. He sighed, wiping the sweat from his forehead. Without thinking, she moved toward him. Her body still ached sometimes. Her muscles weren't strong. But today, she didn't care. She bent beside him and placed her hands on the edge of the stone. The human looked at her, surprised. He gave a small shake of the head, as if to say, "It's okay, I've got it." But she didn't stop. She tightened her grip, and together they lifted. The stone rose slowly, shaking a little. But inch by inch, it moved. The man adjusted his stance, and they walked it to the far end of the shelter, placing it carefully on 2 other flat stones. When it was done, they both stepped back. It looked like a table, or maybe an altar. A place to sit, to prepare food, or to just exist. She wiped her forehead and turned toward him. He wasn't smiling. Not exactly. His face was full of something deeper: respect. He looked at her like a partner now. Not someone to save, but someone to build with. That day, they didn't stop working. She helped him gather stones. She found dry grass to stuff into the roof. She carried water in clay jars, balancing them with care. The more she moved, the more alive she felt. Her body was still healing. But something inside her, something greater, was already whole. The human taught her without speaking. He showed her how to stack stones tightly so they wouldn't fall. He used hand gestures, small nods, and soft grunts to guide her. And she watched, learned, and followed. When the sun reached the highest point, they sat under a nearby tree for rest. She offered him half of the dried roots she had saved from yesterday. He took it with a grateful nod, chewing quietly. Beside him, she sat with the wooden bird in her lap. She pointed to it, dates, then pointed to him. He tilted his head. She repeated it again, this time, pressing her fingers to her chest, then pointing. At him again, he finally understood. She was asking, "Did you carve this?" He nodded slowly. Then he picked up a stick and drew something in the dirt. A house, and beside it a figure with long arms. A smaller figure beside it, and above them, a bird. She stared at the drawing. She understood. The bird meant home, family. Peace. Her eyes softened. Later that evening, they stood together at the far side of the shelter. The wall was nearly complete. She turned and looked at the little space they had built. The walls were strong. The roof was patched. The fire pit was solid. There was now a place to sit, to sleep, to cook, to rest. It was more than she ever imagined. Having again, and she had helped make it. Not just with her hands, but with her will. She turned to the man. She wanted to say something, anything, but words still felt too small. So instead, she lifted one last stone and placed it into the final gap in the outer wall. It fit perfectly. The man placed his hand over. It pays, and then hers, 2 different hands, 2 different lives, 1 wall, 1 home. That night, as the stars returned, the woman sat by the fire. The human rested nearby, half asleep, his head leaning against the wall. She looked at him in the firelight. He wasn't a savior. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't even from her world, but he had built something more powerful than anyone else ever had. He had built trust, not by asking, not by ordering, but by lifting, by listening, by staying. And now? She didn't just have stone walls. She had something no one had given her before. She belonged. The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the rocky sky in shades of fire and gold. The final stone had been placed. The shelter now stood fully complete. It was not grand. It was not perfect, but it was real, and strong, and warm. The alien woman sat inside, watching the soft shadows dance across the stone walls. The fire crackled near the doorway, just as it did every night. Her blanket lay folded at the edge of her bed. The wooden bird still watched from the window. Everything was still, but something felt different now. The work was done. The wall, the roof, the bed, the table, all complete and in her chest. A silent question was rising like smoke. Would he leave now? After all, he had built what she needed. He had brought her back from the edge of death, given her warmth, given her food, given her a place to sleep and be safe. Would he disappear just like he came? Without warning, without a word, her fingers tightened around the stone cup she was holding. She didn't know why, but the thought of him leaving hurt not just a little. A lot. She tried to swallow it, to act strong, to act like she didn't care, but she did. She cared. Outside, she heard his footsteps. She stood quickly and walked out of the shelter. There he was, just returning from the hills, with a small bag slung over his shoulder. He wasn't carrying stones anymore. Instead, he had brought dried fruits, firewood, and something wrapped in cloth. He walked up to the small stone table outside and gently placed the bundle on top. Then, without speaking, he unwrapped it. Inside was a loaf of soft, brown bread, a handful of dried berries, and something else, a wooden bowl, carved smooth and polished. He pushed the bowl toward her. She blinked, confused, then slowly picked it up. Her fingers ran along the edge. It was handmade, like the bird, but deeper. Carefully shaped, it was for her. He had brought her a gift not because she needed it, but because he wanted her to have something beautiful. She looked at him, and for the first time, she spoke. Her voice was soft, shaky. Just one word, a simple sound from her language, Thalane. It meant, "Thank you." The human froze for a moment. Then, very slowly, he smiled, not the usual small smile. This one was wide, warm, full of something deeper. He didn't speak back, but his eyes answered everything. That night, she stayed awake long after the fire died. He didn't leave. He slept outside her shelter, his body resting against the curve of the outer wall, wrapped in his own thin cloth. He didn't ask for a place inside. He didn't act like he owned the space, even after building it with his hands. He respected her right to choose, and in that choice, she found something powerful. She stepped outside in the darkness. Holding the wooden blanket he had once given her, she walked over to him quietly, slowly, and draped it over his chest. He stirred, opened one eye, looked at her. She said nothing. He said nothing, but the meaning was clear. You stayed for me, I stay for you. The next few days were peaceful. They didn't build anymore. They lived. They ate together. They worked together. She showed him how to carve small stones into cups. He showed her how to start a fire using a spark tool. They couldn't speak each other's language, but every look, every smile, every gentle act filled the silence. One day, she brought him a gift, a necklace made of small, smooth stones tied together with dried vine. She had carved a symbol in the center, the shape of a house. He didn't know what to say, so she placed it around his neck herself. From that moment, she noticed something new in his eyes. He didn't just see her as someone he had saved. He saw her as someone who had saved him. 2. She didn't ask why he came here. She didn't ask what pain he was running from, for what home he had lost. But deep inside, she felt it just like her. He had been broken. Just like her, he had once been alone. But now, they weren't. Not anymore, because what they built with stone had become something more than walls. They had built a bond. One evening, the stars returned and the wind was calm. The human sat beside her and handed her a flat stone. He had carved something new. 2 figures, sitting side by side, and above them a flame. She looked at him. He looked at her, and without speaking, they both knew he wasn't going anywhere. The days passed gently, like falling leaves in quiet wind. The alien woman no longer counted the days since she had been abandoned. She didn't even think about her old tribe anymore. Her thoughts, her heart, her time, everything now belonged to a new rhythm, a new life. And it all started with a stone, one placed by a human who never asked for anything in return. She now walked with strength. She carried water, gathered wood, and helped repair small parts of the shelter when strong winds came. The shelter wasn't just a place to survive anymore. It was a place to live. And it wasn't just hers, it was theirs. She and the human didn't speak the same language, but they didn't need to. They had created their own way of understanding. Shared looks, hand signs, carved drawings in the dirt, and quiet smiles at the fire each night. The home had grown too. There were now small things that made it feel alive: shaped stones placed in circles, hanging bundles of herbs, painted patterns on the outer walls, and carved figures of birds, stars, and flames. But one thing was still missing. He had given her everything: warmth, food, safety, and hope. She wanted to give him something. In return, not just a carved bird, not another necklace. She wanted to give him a piece of herself, something real, something no one had ever given him. That evening, while he was out collecting dry wood, she sat alone inside the shelter, holding a smooth, flat stone in her hands. For the last 2 days, she had been carving it quietly, using a sharp crystal he had given her. It was almost ready now. Her fingers were sore. Her eyes were tired. But her heart was full. When he returned, she waited for him just outside the doorway. The stars were bright above them. The wind was gentle. The fire crackled. Between them, she walked to him slowly and placed the stone in his hands. At first, he looked confused. Then his eyes focused on the carved shapes. Two figures, a human and an alien, standing side by side above them, a home, and beneath them joined hands. His lips parted slightly. He ran his fingers over the carving. Then looked at her. She pressed her hand to her chest, then reached out and placed that same hand on his chest, and whispered softly, "Talaran." He didn't understand the word, but her eyes said everything. She meant, "You are my home now." He didn't say anything back. Instead, he stepped closer, very gently. He placed the stone gift on the window shelf, beside the carved bird. Then, for the first time, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Her smaller fingers fit between his like they were meant to. And in that moment, there were no more questions, no more fear, no more loneliness. They had built a home from stone, but what they truly built was something far stronger. That night, they sat beside the fire. Hand in hand, she leaned her head against his shoulder. He looked up at the sky. She looked at the flame. And both of them, without saying a single word, knew they had started as strangers. One lost, one wandering, both broken in different ways. But now, they were each other's reason to stay. The next morning, the alien woman stepped out into the golden sunlight and smiled. She saw the human carefully planting something near the side of the sheltered tiny seeds in small holes. He had found them. While foraging, she knelt beside him and helped him cover the seeds. The land was still dry. The rocks still sharp. The world still wild. But between those stones, something new was growing. And it wasn't just plants. It was love, trust, family, something neither of them thought they'd ever find as the wind blew softly across the hill. And the little house stood firm against the sky. The world went on. But here, between one human and one alien, a small miracle had taken place. Not with machines, not with power, not with war, but with bare hands and an open heart.